4,
Okay.
5, 6.
We're live now. Are you all ready?
Yeah, we're ready. Okay. Welcome back. I'm sitting here with Stephen Smith, who just finished his talk on pointers to the quiet mind, and here with Cory, and we're going to continue the discussing and dialoguing for half an hour related to the topic, the theme that Stephen started. We ourselves have some questions, and Stephen might want to bring some more things out, but we also have a whole set of questions from the online audience, which we first going to go through a few of those. Yeah.
Yeah, so I just have these here. I'm just picking these randomly. So one question here, if you see the problem of not being free, must you be free to see that?
The short answer is no. Yeah. If I'm in prison, I can see that I'm in prison, but that doesn't mean that I'm free. In other words, negative perception is quite valuable, actually. I think we're not used to it because so many of the things we do are assertions about things. Even scientific assertions, they're saying things are this way. But if you say something is not so, it doesn't necessarily create the opposite. This is actually something within thinking itself. This is not, in a way, you don't necessarily create the opposite. We think in terms of opposite, positive, negative, good, bad, evil, we think that way, but it ain't necessary. You don't have to think that way. Something can just not be. So that creates a different space, and I think in my talk I was talking about this place of space that you can open up, which is relative to the quiet mind. It may even be the quiet mind in a sense, where nothing is happening. So nothing's not the opposite of something.
Right.
But does it include then? I think that's somehow the underlying question. I think it's like you can logically the thought machine, as you called it. You used the word thought machine somewhere in your talk.
Yeah.
The thought machine can determine or can make statements about itself, right?
Right.
It can be the thought machine can make a statement. I'm in prison, or can maybe out of prison. But I can imagine that you would say around that, like, well, that is not perception, right? I mean, the thought machine concluding something is unequal to perception, because perception is defined as something separate from the mechanical thought. So how do you look at that?
Well, I think if we take the analogy of somebody in prison, he can see that he's not free, but it doesn't mean that he's outside walking about like a free man. I think that's fairly good. He can recognize that he's. So in some way he.
But that you're somehow saying I'm just trying to push, because I find it really interesting. So you're somehow saying it's not enough that the thought machine creates the conclusion, I'm not free. But when you say he can see, means it's not a conclusion. It's somehow something that can be perceived.
Yeah, he would feel it. I haven't been in prison except for an hour or two once. on a not very serious charge. I mean,
we'll cut this out.
So you're in prison, but yes, it intimates perhaps that there is some other place which is free, but it's the concept of freedom. Which is, it's not the same as being out of the prison or even in the prison. Anyway, the prison yard's a different thing. That's semi-free. Yeah.
Okay.
So we take another question from.
Please.
So just in sort of response to the general theme of the talk, does silence or a quiet mind depend upon the environment?
I don't think it actually depends on anything. But having said that, certain places, spaces are conducive to it. And that may be because a silent person lived there, like here. Or perhaps even that monks, say, have meditated in this place for hundreds of years. That may also, it creates a climate. So the climate is conducive. But it won't make your mind quiet necessarily. But it is conducive. And people have actually given a lot of thought to how to do this and what you put in that space, and above all, what you don't put in it. So you don't fill it with junk and you don't fill it with noise and you don't, you know. So it is a space. And I think the element of space is very, is quite significant, quite important. This is a spacious room, you know, it's deliberately built with that feeling to it. It's not an accident.
Maybe because I know you know more about this aspect of where Krishnamurti would actually go to great length, working on an environment that is somehow quiet. Like I know in Brockwood he would. When they designed the quiet room, a lot of thought was put into it. It should be in the building, but not part of the building. It should not be in the center. You should not be seen. It should not be something that you go in vain. And what struck me, or what was really unusual, because normally you would look at a quiet room as something, hey, I feel stressful. I'm going to the quiet room to wind down, to calm down. And somewhere in one of his writings he says, no, it's actually the intent of the quiet room in the place, in the centers. But I guess that should be a universal principle, I guess. These rooms, the quiet rooms should be, you should bring quietness to it.
Yes,
and that would create something. And he said, and that is where everything emanates from. He said that is actually where it also. Could you talk a little bit more about that? What he could have pointed at there?
Well, yeah, that is specifically about Brockwood, but it would apply other places too. I think. I think he was thinking of himself as a guest who would go there. So at the beginning when he goes there, he's full of his usual preoccupations, his domestic or business or professional preoccupations. So all that buzz is going on with him, and he might spend 2 or 3 days just going for walks or just being quiet, and then he would go to the quiet room. So there's a sort of, there's a calming down period. I mean, it's a very elementary level. I think that's, you know, that's what it was, and also that it would be an individual choice. It's not a place for group meditation. There is no group meditation in that place. There isn't here either. You go there alone. And I think that's also important, because you begin to follow the curve of your own intimations, the curve of your own intuitions about what this is all about, and then you know, you sort of move on that. I think it's to, as I understand it, is to let the wave of your daily preoccupations subside, or mundane preoccupations, let them subside. And then something else can come in. That's the purpose of a retreat anyway, actually, you know, that you allow finer things to come in, because you're not so busy dashing about getting things done.
But it would even go as far that when people come to the retreat, I mean, the first 3 days, what you're saying, don't go to the quiet room. It's almost that he would suggest only when you're somehow calmed down, then go to the quiet room.
Yeah.
Which I've thought is unusual.
Yeah, it's not the way you think of it. I think it has a practical aspect that it was the beginning of the center and the beginning of the quiet room. So what happens at the beginning is actually extremely important. For instance, at the center at Brockwood, at first they only took guests who wanted to come for their own retreat. There were no groups, no events, for several years actually. And only later did they move into having theme weekends and study retreats and long weekend dialogues, and that came in, but it came in later. So in other words, there had been a groundwork laid of people who were seriously interested.
So does it have to do then with the people or with the space? Is it? So is something, okay, then the people get into a habit, or is there something hanging in the air, as it put it, or in the ether?
Yeah, I think after some time, I think there is. Maybe it's not there immediately when because everything's so new, but it does have to be generated, but after a sufficient amount of time, I think there is also the other effect of you kind of walk into it. There is something there. People comment on it all the time, and here the silence is almost, you can cut it with a knife. It's very dense. So there is that quality. Yeah.
So here's a question. How could I start practicing self-observing? Did Krishnamurti give any practices to get started and pull it into action?
Well, he might have done on a personal level. But, there's the teaching, and then there are various contexts in which he appeared. We've already mentioned one, like in the school. Well, a school is not the same as a platform. And Kay was very contextual, actually. He didn't carry over from one thing to another. He didn't operate on memory, you could see. So, I think he gave pointers, like look at a tree, things like that, which are fairly straightforward. And why it's advantageous to be in a natural setting, like here, because you're surrounded by natural things. So look at a tree, don't call it a tree, look at a leaf, look at a, So you're cultivating a different habit of mind. Of course, it shouldn't become a habit either, but a different way of looking, put it that way. Yeah, I think you have to persist in it. Maybe write thoughts down, or the various things you can do.
He does suggest that, right?
What, writing thoughts down? Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did. Yeah, for a while at least. Yeah,
not in public talks, but in the discussions or in smaller group discussions.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, yeah. So I think it begins with observation, but you can begin with the observation of the outer. That he consistently said, you can start with the observation of the outer, so look at a cloud, look at a tree, look at the sky, look at, because looking at your fellow human beings is generally more difficult, because the whole issue of the image comes up. Whether you like that person, you don't like them, or I want to sit near her, or I don't want to sit near him, I don't, all this comes up. So, but in observation of nature, it's much more objective, impersonal. And impersonal observation is really, I didn't go into it much today, there wouldn't have been time, but impersonal, and he even talked about impersonal friendship among a group of us. So you have this impersonal friendship, which means that you can tune into one another and be present to one another, and exchange with one another, but it's not on the level of like and dislike particularly. You hold something in common, in fact. That's more what it means. You hold something in common, and then you can... And I would say it's worked with the people I've known who've been in that, arena. It doesn't matter if you haven't seen them for 5 years. You can still pick up and carry on. It's not dependent on personal like and dislike.
Well, it's interesting maybe to bring that out, because typically when we say we have something in common, it's ideas or values or belongings, but something. So what is it in common? If it's not that, what is the possibility of us having in common?
Well, I think that the kind of thing that we're doing now, going into things, exploring things, looking at things, that's what you hold in common. That is the common, actually. That is the common consciousness. It's just looking at itself. You can look at it like that. There's Cory, Jaap and Steve, but, it's essentially it's consciousness looking at itself. Now, there's a power in that which is ignored if you don't do it, because it's like something running haywire, It runs haywire, or it just goes its own way, or, we think we're in charge, but actually we're not. We think we're running, but actually consciousness is running us. It's and it's a very powerful thing also. So when you begin to self-reflect and mutually reflect, then you introduce another element into that, which is the question. The questioning itself has an impact. So the machine's not running just automatically, mechanically. It's there's some self-reflection going on. It's very important, actually.
Even when there's conflict.
Particularly when there's conflict, because if one can do it, then that's usually or often the conflict kind of takes the person away from self-reflection, because they want to impose their own opinion, or they feel hurt by something, or multiple things. But you lose it in that sense. But the sense of questioning, particularly questioning your own reactions, is, I think it's key to it. It has to happen at some point. Otherwise, these other powerful mechanisms that are in the air, like the political mentality, for instance, they will begin to take over.
Wouldn't you say that that's actually maybe something that Krishnamurti was talking about a lot, and maybe others also, but I mean... like that he didn't see meditation as a activity that is discontinuous, like you between 6 and 7 in the morning you meditate, and then the rest is your life is unrelated to that. That somehow the meditation had to be in like an ongoing activity. Which and there were maybe moments where you were meditating without any stimuli.
Yes.
There is no question in that, but I just...
That's true, and in that sense, the meditation is almost a form of inquiry in itself, because you are actually suspending the normal activity of thought, however, to whatever extent one is able to, so that it's not just running, it's not just running you, basically. We think we're running the show, but we're not, actually.
But it's quite significant, because actually the more popular way of looking at meditation is that you have your busy life, and then you have a scheduled time.
You have 3 times a day in 20 minutes. It works to some extent. Yeah, it slows down traffic. Or it's
Yeah,
something. They
slows
did
down
some
traffic.
experiments in Israel, I think it was. You know, there were fewer accidents when everybody was meditating. But anyway, yeah, that's a palliative, really. That's a palliative. It's like introducing mindfulness into schools, which a lot of schools are doing now. They have an insane curriculum, and they're pushing everybody as hard as they can to, you know, succeed in whatever discipline they're involved in. And then, because it causes so much stress, and so many kids are on pills and, you know, self-harming and so many horrors, introduce some mindfulness, you know, so you'd have half an hour's mindfulness. I'm not saying they shouldn't do it, they probably should do more of it, but it's a palliative. I mean, what Kay is talking about is shifting the whole structure, which includes meditation. It's shifting the whole structure of consciousness so that it operates in a new and different way. Then you don't need the palliative.
It might also then imply different life choices.
Oh yeah, definitely, clearly, yeah. Well, you can't join some authoritarian, militaristic, you know, organization. You have to find a way of life that's kind to the earth, kind to other people, you know, that's moving in an organic sort of way. It's doing no harm. That's a basic, you know, do no harm. Because every harm you do comes back on you, that's one thing. And because it creates a peaceful world. You know, not doing harm is it's quite a basic tenet, really.
But wouldn't you also say like one of the things is that it's impossible to say, well, I'm gonna if you're serious about this and start looking at yourself, you cannot say, well, I clean up this bit, but I'm not cleaning up this bit. You know what I mean? That you cannot say.
In your own character, you mean?
Well, any activity, you know, you cannot say I'm kicking my dog, but at the same time I talk about peace, you know, or I'm trying to be peaceful. You know, I mean that there's no hiding. You know what I mean? You cannot.
There's no hiding. No, quite. Yeah. No, it has to be consistent. Yeah.
Consistent. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a question, I think we have time maybe for one more, that I think is related, and it's just to bring out this distinction between what is negative thought versus what you've used the word assertive thought or positive thinking, because I think it's related to not only when talking about sharing something in common, but also just this thing about meditation, and so maybe just say more about the distinction between the two.
Right. Negative thinking, I said.
Negative thinking.
Yeah,
right.
it's a little bit different because it's a present tense. It's present participle. Negative thinking. So it's not. It's more. It's important distinction because it's a sort of in itself a state of mind rather than a thing. So it's a suspension where you're not focused on anything and you're not driven by anything, which is itself a kind of meditation, actually. You don't have a particular object of concern, and you're not concerned with any particular thing, but you're receptive, put it that way, sensitive. But not going in any direction. You can, one can experiment with this. If somebody's bugging you or some issue is bugging you, shift the direction of your attention to who you are, and it does work, because actually you realize that the person you're thinking about is not the person, it's your concept of the person, it's your image of the person. So if you lay that aside, the other opens up. So it's actually quite active in a sense. positive thing is what, they're all peddling positive thinking. There was that film, I don't know if you saw it, it was very good, American Beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, the wife is on one of these things, I'll sell a house today, I'll sell a house today, I'll sell a house today, because she doesn't, because it's something of a comedy, ironically. But see, that's positive thinking. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this. So you're kind of working yourself up, you're psyching yourself up to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, but it's quite common in our society, because there's so much emphasis on success.
But what's wrong with that? I mean, how would you articulate that?
What's wrong with it?
What's wrong with positive thinking?
Well, in some areas, I suppose it's okay. I mean, you need to feel that you can do things, but as a mechanism for approaching life as a whole, it's not approaching life as a whole. It's very targeted for a start, and also it implies that if I sell the house, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be, I'm going to feel good about myself. So it has a lot of weaknesses in it as a way of approaching life. It's already structured in a certain way, and it has certain values implicit in it also. And probably I'm treading over people while I'm doing it.
I mean, we have many more questions. There's about 2.5 minutes left. Is there anything that you say, hey, from now, your preparation, the talk, and now having this discussion, is there anything that comes out of this that you say, hey, that's actually something that would make it, that I've not touched upon, or that would make it more complete, or an element that's important to mention?
I can't think of anything immediately off the top of my head. I think it's rather something that unfolds in the exchange, and that if somebody, say, a questioner writes in and says, that triggers something, and then there is a response. I put it that way. There is a response. So. I think the impact is much more in the general field than in anything I've retained or would wish to expatiate on.
Yeah, I mean, I had one question, but you have more or less already answered it. It was I took that from the book,
The Quiet Mind.
and it says like. The book, Can the Mind Be Quiet?
Can the Mind Be Quiet, yeah.
And and Krishnamurti starts with somewhere he says, what's important that you destroy the meditator.
The meditator. Yeah, you destroy the meditator, yeah, quite so. So there's only meditation. He once said to me, and it was in the course of a dialogue we were having with some people, and he suddenly turned to me and said, "Can you hear something?" And of course I said yes, because I wanted to. And he said, "The meditator is the meditation." So I think that, it's like the observer in the sense, there's no, when that separation ceases, then you step into that new ground. So I think when he's saying destroy the meditator, it's radical. It's destroy the person, really. It means destroy the person. Then there is only meditation. But it's a vast field.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cory.
Thank you, guys.
Fantastic, wonderful to have this exchange with you. And I think
it's off to a good start, I hope.